All right, today we have an awesome interview with one of our own. David Sirota's joined the Young Turks. I don't have the soundboard. Okay, so David's going to be a contributor for the Young Turks. You're going to see many of his videos, many videos from David, and they're going to be fantastic. They're going to be tremendous.
Thank you.
Welcome, David.
Thank you for asking me to come on the team.
Yeah, love it. Long time coming. You obviously belong, and our audience already loves you, so that's great.
I'm thrilled to do it.
Okay, now for a lot of the folks that have joined the team, I do kind of like an introductory interview. Who is this guy about, right? Now a lot of you already know David, but if you don't, and even for those of you who do, I mean, you probably don't know his whole story, right?
It's like the scene from Goonies. Tell us everything.
That's right. So let's go all the way back. You're in the womb. Okay, seriously, where'd you grow up?
I grew up outside of Philadelphia.
Okay, a Philly boy.
Yes.
Okay, are you like, do you care about Philly, or like are you one of those homers who are like, yeah, man, the Eagles, cheesesteaks?
So I was one of the biggest Philadelphia sports fans that ever existed, and I'm willing to. I know.
Wow.
Philadelphia. No, everybody in high school who, if they saw this, would agree. I was an insanely crazy Phillies and Sixers fan in particular, also an Eagles and Flyers fan, but like there was no bigger Philadelphia 76ers fan and Phillies fan. And I had to give it all up after 1990, what was it, 1993.
Why?
When was it 93 now? See, I've like blacked it out of my mind.
The strike?
No, it was when the Phillies, after years and years of being terrible, went to the World Series versus the Toronto Blue Jays. And then Mitch Williams threw that pitch to Joe Carter, who then hit it out of the park.
Oh yeah.
And broke all of the city's heart, and including my heart. And after that, I basically decided that I can't be, like, it's not that I don't like the Philadelphia sports teams, it's like I just can't handle them on a regular, but it became too painful. And I actually did the math on this, that between 1980, after the Phillies won the World Series, and 2008, that was 28 years of times 4 seasons of losing sports, which is apparently one of the longest total aggregate amount of not winning a championship in sports history. So I think
for any given town,
for any given 4-sport town. So I feel like I had a justification to basically say I can't deal with Philadelphia sports.
Okay, so I have not really told this story in its entirety ever before, and I had a shockingly similar experience.
Really? With who?
Yeah, with the Yankees, because I grew up in New Jersey.
The Don Mattingly terrible years.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, man, from 1978, 9 when I came into the country, so it would have been 79 season, right? All the way to 1993.
Right, they were terrible.
Yeah, and so now I say 94 because the strike happened in 94, but it was actually 93.
Yeah.
And it wasn't actually the strike. It was that I was so emotionally invested, and they finally made the fucking playoffs, right? And the Yankees are supposed to be awesome. They're supposed to, but they're in the playoffs, and they had lost in the playoffs to the Rangers, I think, the year before. Now they're playing the Mariners. Come on, you could beat the fucking Mariners, right? Yeah. And they fucking blew it. Yeah. And I was so emotionally devastated by that.
Yes.
I knew the lineup of the Yankees inside and out from 79 to 93. Yeah. Rooted for them, and I would go, when I went to Penn in Philly, I would go to the basement where I got better reception for some reason for my shitty old radio. When everybody else is having fun or doing homework or whatever, I'm listening to the entire Yankees game, and I'm like, come on, Claudell Washington, let's go.
Your heart broken.
Yeah, get my heart broken year after year. And after 93, I was like, fuck it, I'm done with this.
That's right. That's right.
I can't keep doing this, especially because they had then in 94, they had a great team and they went on strike. I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, I'm so done, right? So, and then of course, what happened? From there on, the Yankees went on the biggest the longest winning streak anybody's ever seen. Right. Amazing season after amazing season. But I had disinvested. I couldn't do it. It was like getting out of a stock. I was gone. Well, I was 96 when they beat the Braves.
You were already out.
I was already out, and I hated the Braves. And Jimmy Larios was my favorite player. It would have been, if I was as emotionally invested in 96 as 93, 96 would have been the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
But you sold the stock.
But I sold the stock.
See, I went on after rooting for being that Phillies fan, I went to Northwestern. and at Northwestern in, I guess it was my sophomore year. Nobody back then went to Northwestern in order to root for big sports teams. The second year I was at Northwestern, which had apparently it had 50 straight losing seasons or something like that, went all the way to the Rose Bowl. It was this huge thing. They beat Notre Dame. I think they went 10-1. They went to the Rose Bowl, and then in dramatic fashion, they lost the Rose Bowl. And I developed a which of course is slightly self-centered. It's like the world doesn't revolve around me, but it started to feel like every team that I rooted for could get almost there and then just like couldn't pull it off. So now when I have like my brother is a big sports fan, my other brother's a big sports fan, they're basically like, don't root for the team that I'm rooting for. Like literally, we want you to root against. Like I'm the George Costanza. Do the opposite of what I.
Now let me complete this story. And you want to know who David Sirota used to work for and rooted for in 2016? Bernie Sanders.
See, there you go.
It was you.
It was my fault.
No, by the way, every sports fan, mental sports fan like we were, thinks it's them. It was where I sit on the couch, how I hold the drink, yada yada.
That's right.
It obviously affected Omar Marino's batting average.
I hated Michael. The person I hated the most growing up in high school was Michael Jordan, because Michael Jordan would always be the end of the Sixers. It was always like, the Sixers are great this year. They're doing so. Charles Barkley, Johnny Dawkins, Hersey Hawkins. Second round of the playoffs, then boom, Jordan would come in and crush him.
Okay, that's a great background. And then don't you have a friend who wound up putting you in a sitcom, a character that plays you in a sitcom.
Yes. So Adam Goldberg has the ABC's The Goldbergs, which is all about us, me, him, my other friend Mike Levy, and us growing up as middle schoolers outside of Philadelphia. And there's a character on the show called David Sirota, who they casted to look like me, and he wears Sixers garb all the time because that's what I did in high school. And you wonder why I didn't do all that well with women.
Right there with you, brother.
I'm wearing like Sixers gear and whatever. Charles Barkley is more important than anything else to me in high school. And they actually had an episode in which, a true story, which is that I got Charles Barkley's signed sneakers. As a kid, I was at a game, he took off his sneakers, signed them, gave them to me. And in the episode of ABC's The Goldbergs, the main character kind of wins the signed sneakers from the David Sirota character. And it's like, Charles Barkley sneakers. It's like everyone's like worships them as this. And that was, and that show is actually pretty successful. It's funny, when I go out and I talk to people about politics, I did an event at Drinking Liberally in Denver a couple weeks ago. It was like half the people who were there knew me from my radio show and my work, and the other half were like, aren't you the Goldbergs guy? I'm like, yep, that's me. I'm the guy from the Goldbergs.
So it is now a little interesting how parallel our lives are. I also got a signature in Philly from a budding star.
Who?
And I told that in a recent postgame. Ed Rendell.
Oh.
I was at a Penn basketball game.
Like way back.
Yeah, he had just become mayor. He had just become mayor.
Yeah.
And he went to Penn. And so he was at the game.
He's a huge sports fan too.
And Dave Kohler and I thought it would be a nice gag to go get a signature of the mayor. Who cares, right? And then it turned out he was the governor and then the DNC chair and yada yada.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's more valuable now, the signature I have on Ed Rendell's card or your Charles Barkley sneakers.
I'm going with the Charles Barkley sneakers.
Probably.
I still have them.
Of course.
Yeah, they're like, I don't even want to take them out of the box. I don't want the autograph to the sunlight and degrade.
Okay, so how did you get into politics at all?
So let's see. I worked on a congressional campaign when I was at Northwestern by this seat now held by Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat outside of in Evanston, Illinois. Came home, worked for a guy who was running for his fourth attempt to become House of Representatives.
Shaka Fata.
No, there's a guy named Joe Huffle who on the fourth try won a 40-year held Republican district.
Wow, I like that stick-to-it attitude.
Fourth time, man. Then I moved down to Washington. I got a job with Bernie Sanders. I was Bernie Sanders' press secretary. I would like to, it would be nice to tell you that I applied for the job because of Bernie. That would be like, I just really wanted to work for Bernie back in the late 90s. That would be a nice story, but I can't, I have to be totally honest, it was one of these in DC. Sometimes they advertise these jobs, and it's like, send your resume to like drawer 88, and it's like, they don't tell you who you're applying to, other than it's like, I remember this. They said progressive member of Congress. A lot of times they say Democrat or Republican. This was a progressive member of Congress from a northeastern state. Apply for press secretary. I sent in my resume. I get a call. I don't know, a couple weeks later from Jeff Weaver, who of course, from Jeff Weaver. Hey, we got your resume. Will you come in for a meeting for Bernie Sanders? I remember being like, wait, Bernie Sanders, like, he's the socialist guy, right? Like, I didn't even, met with him, had a great meeting with Jeff, had a great meeting with Bernie, and I remember the night they offered me the job, and the night before when they offered me the job, the night before I was supposed to give them an answer, I was like, what's gonna happen if I take a job with a guy who's a self-identified socialist? Am I like never gonna work, and like, is it gonna be hard to work in democratic politics? And it's like the late 90s, height of Clintonism, and I take the job, and it was like the best job I ever had. I mean, it was like really, it was so amazing to work in the House of Representatives. So you're inside this institution, the Gingrich Congress. You're getting an inside view of how it all works, but from a guy who's got a completely outsider perspective about how corrupt the institution is, how dysfunctional it is. I learned so much in that job. I was working at it at a time in your life where it's you're right out of college. It's when I kind of think it's like when your brain is really crystallizing all of your views about, and you kind of figure out how the world works. And then I went from there and I worked for the Democrats on the House Appropriations Committee.
Okay, hold on. Okay, let me just rewind real quick. So you worked on Huffle's campaign, and because you did, you wound up getting a job with Huffle's House.
No. I went down to Washington after that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Bernie's thing is the first job you get in the House.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you heard about it through friends, and then you put it into drawer 88. Yeah, that's right. I got you. Yeah. And so the press secretary is kind of a heavy job.
Yeah.
Like, how old were you at that time?
Let's see. It was 99, so I was 23, 24.
That's amazing. Isn't that amazing that a 23, 24-year-old can be press secretary for a congressman?
Well, I mean, and this is no diss on Bernie, but it was like, he wasn't a junior member of the House, but he was sort of I guess he had been, he'd been in the House 3 or 4 terms, I guess. So he was, it was a huge job for somebody that age. But if you go to Capitol Hill, you walk around Capitol Hill, you'll see there's like a lot of young people are in jobs like that in the House.
Yeah, I'm surprised more 24-year-olds press secretaries don't screw up.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have my share of screw ups, believe me, and I mean, Bernie he's a great boss. He's extremely loyal. He's very demanding, but demanding in a good way, right? I mean, he expects a lot out of his people, and it was at that age, it was. I mean, look, last time I saw him, he was out on the campaign trail, and it was like he was like a member of the Beatles, right? It was like you open the door, and there's like this huge throng of people, and I said, I still remember driving your Saturn around Vermont in the middle of the winter to like town meetings of like 16 people, and it was like snowing, and he'd be like, we got to get down to Rutland for the meeting. I don't care if it's snowing. I mean, this is a guy, and the thing is that it was interesting to work for somebody who, and I don't think I've ever worked for somebody like this ever again. I don't think like any of the other political people I've worked for, which is that he has universal name ID and name recognition, even back then in Vermont. I mean, like, it wasn't like 2 degrees of separation. It's like almost like everybody you met with Bernie had already met Bernie at least once themselves personally, no matter where you were in the state.
So I love that story because I love those stories where you believe so much in what you're doing that it doesn't matter that you're reaching 16 people in the middle of a snowstorm. And that's the attitude that carries you to what Bernie wound up doing, because it was that passion and authenticity that shines through to millions of people eventually, and you can't fake it. That's the same guy who drives out of his way in a snowstorm to see 16 people that winds up having all those people follow.
He is so driven. I mean, he's really just incredibly driven. And the other thing about him is that when I've seen him speak now, I can still almost in a lot of ways complete the sentences that he's saying in my mind because he's been saying the same thing certainly since back when I were, and that's a compliment to him, meaning, longer hours for lower wages, economic inequality, the middle class squeeze. I mean, this is a person who, he knows what he's about, he knows what he wants to do, and he hasn't really deviated from that at all.
Isn't it amazing that the mainstream media still doesn't think there's a real uprising happening, to quote, the title of your first book, because that's a guy that when you were working for him was the very fringe. Like no one in the 1990s could have imagined that Bernie Sanders would be a real candidate for president. No one.
2 years ago, I said this to a friend recently. I said 2 years ago, if I would tell people I work for Bernie Sanders, most non-political people would be like, I don't, who is that? Or maybe I kind of have heard of. Like now he has, incredible name ID. People know exactly, who he is, what he's about. I think I saw a poll. He's one of the most respected political figures in the whole country. Clearly that's a testament to him. But I think it's also a testament to the fact that his time and the time for his politics have certainly arrived. I mean, we are in a fundamentally different situation than certainly when I was working for Bernie at the end of the Clinton administration that we were back then.
Is it the man or is it the time? That's a debate that always happens in history when studying history. And the answer is almost always both, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And it's Bernie, who's been the same guy for all these years, has met the right time.
That's right.
And so that's why he's now in. So does that means that time has arrived? That time for progressivism, for populism is right here.
Absolutely.
But they won't see it. So I love your story. We go on, I could talk to you for a minimum 90 minutes on it, but let's fast forward to your sense of populism, because you've been writing about this for a long time. So a little bit of a fast forward. How did you get to journalism? And then once you got into journalism, why not keep it mainstream like everybody else is? You always had this populist streak. Where did that come from?
Well, so after I worked on Capitol Hill for Bernie, then for the Appropriations Committee, I worked on a couple campaigns. One campaign I worked for was Brian Schweitzer. When he ran for Senate, and early on he was a farmer and had never run in Montana.
Yeah.
And he got very close and he lost, and then he went on to run again. I worked on both campaigns. He became governor. We moved out to Montana.
Another populist, if you don't know.
Total populist. I mean, very economically progressive on core, healthcare issues and regulatory issues and the like. And when I moved out to Montana, I decided to write a book about. My first book was called Hostile Takeover, which was about how big money doesn't just buy votes. It's from sort of my experience on campaigns and on Capitol Hill. It buys the terms of the debate. That you don't have to buy a congressperson's vote with an envelope stuffed full of cash if you've created a political debate that creates two potential outcomes that serve your interests, if you're a corporation or a lobbyist. And it's all about how the actual terms of the debate, how we talk about things, are rigged against what the vast majority of Americans that polls tell us want. It rigs a debate in a way that creates outcomes that serve the wealthy and the powerful. So I wrote that book. I wrote a second book called The Uprising, which was about populist uprising on both the right and left. I mean, I spent time with the Minutemen, the conservative guys who are on the border, anti-immigration. I spent time with union organizers. So I got into journalism through writing books and reporting books, and I wrote a syndicated column. And then, then I got to host, when I moved down to Denver, I got to host a radio show, a drive time radio show for Clear Channel. On a progressive station, and then they moved me over to co-host with Michael Heck of a Job Brownie, if you remember that guy.
Yeah.
That was not that tail end there was not very pleasant to work with. Work on that show I was put on a conservative station, and then I sort of moved into full-time investigative journalism from there, where I am now at International Business Times, which is the sister company of Newsweek.
Yep. So full-time job for David is senior editor at International Business Time, and he's a contributor now to TYT. So that's a great, overall look at a big picture look. So when did you write Hostile Takeover and Uprising?
Let's see. Hostile Takeover. I always forget about the paperback of but it was Hostile Takeover was 2007. The uprising was 2009. I think I've got this right. And then I wrote Back to Our Future, which was 2011. Back to Our Future was, speaking, I mean, Donald Trump kind of fits into this. Back to Our Future is about how 1980s pop culture has infused our politics, that the pop culture of the 1980s that many of us our age grew up on shaped the way we think about politics today. And Donald Trump is sort of, I certainly didn't predict Donald Trump in that book, but Donald Trump, this 80s icon of so many different kind of 80s memes of the swashbuckling CEO and the deification of wealth and all that. Donald Trump is almost like the grand unifying theory being proven that our instincts, our political instincts were shaped in the 80s and now have fully come to full fruition in the Trump presidency.
Well, so that's why I brought up the years, because like Bernie Sanders was right all along, it just took the time to catch up to him. Look, when I did the announcement video for Justice Democrats, I talked about the hostile takeover of the Democratic Party. I literally used that phrase.
Yeah.
And then I had reporters ask me about it. They're like, oh, that seems a bit much. I'm like, no, it's not. You wrote about it back in 2007, and that is exactly what happened.
What's happened.
Right.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think, look, we are living in a time. This is not a partisan or ideological statement. We are living in a time where big money has taken over a large portion of the Democratic Party. It certainly has taken over and controls and dictates and influences a lot of what most of the Republican Party. And that if you really want to know if the two political parties operating in Washington and across the country, it's not the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. There's a pretty small party that you might call the People Party, and there's a huge party that's called that I call the Money Party. And that's the paradigm that we're in now. I think with people like Bernie Sanders and that trend that's been happening, the People Party's gotten a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. But don't fool yourself into thinking that the Money Party is. I know you don't, but that the Money Party is weakened. It's weaker, but it is certainly the dominant force in our politics, and that's been the thrust of my reporting as a journalist, is to spotlight and show how money almost always dictates the terms of the debate and what's really going on. And I find, you asked me earlier, why have you been in independent media? Why has that been kind of the anchor of your career? And I think if you look at traditional legacy media, what you often see is coverage that writes money almost completely out of the story. Yep. That you see these stories about, Hillary said this, or Obama did this, or Trump did this, or whatever, and it's all about the personal intrigue and the kind of gossip and gamesmanship, and stripped out of the story is actually, well, what moneyed interests are paying which political actors to shape which specific provisions that serve those moneyed interests. That is not often part of the story. I will say this as one asterisk: the one part of the media where you do see some of that consistently is in the business press. The business press, I mean, they don't cover it from an ideological perspective, and there's not much of a political analysis, but you see more of it in places like Business Week and the Wall Street Journal, because those publications are written for people who care about nothing other than making money. I mean, literally, I don't, if you're a Business Week reader and you're an investor, you're like, I don't care what this pundit thinks or wants or is pushing for. All I want to know is what's actually happening, who's actually behind this, because I'm trying to bet on it in a certain way to make money. So you get some more of it in the business press, but in the kind of traditional legacy media, the political pages, you don't get much of it at all. And so that the independent media is one of the only places where you can do that and cover it in a serious way.
Yeah, that's why the mainstream media is always talking about, the honorable gentleman from here and the honorable gentleman from there, and they're having an ideological fight. They're not. They're having, at best, a donor fight.
Correct. I mean, they're proxies for, in many cases, they're proxies for their donors. And I think that, it's funny, I'll give you an example. There was a story recently in Colorado about how the Republican Attorney General was going to sue Boulder County over Boulder County moving to ban fracking or heavily regulate fracking in Boulder. And the Republican Attorney General of Colorado recently filed a lawsuit, taxpayer money, to assert the state's right to preempt those local restrictions. Now, there was an irony of, Republicans claim they're for local control, and you got a Republican saying to a county, you can't regulate this stuff. And across the media in Colorado, and this is not to say Colorado's much worse than anywhere else, but nobody had bothered in the media had bothered to mention how much money the Republican Attorney General of Colorado had been getting from and was supported by in her election campaigns by the oil and gas industry. So we did a second day story and we just basically dove into the numbers, teased it all out, showed exactly how much money had flowed in. And what was interesting was, I remember asking a friend, I said, why was this not isn't this the first thing that should be reported on when an action like this happens? And so often that part of the story is just not part of the story.
Yep, and so let's end on this note. You mentioned it back in 2013, I don't know that, or back 2 years ago, I don't know that anybody would have thought Bernie Sanders could win. And somebody in our audience found a video of me saying in 2013, Bernie Sanders can beat Hillary Clinton in a primary, right? Yeah. And in 2011, you wrote a book called The Uprising where you said the left and the right their populism would rise up.
That's right.
And look at what happened. So I think that there is value in being right even if you're alone. And even if there's derision from the mainstream media, or in the case of Bernie Sanders, the establishment, politicians, stick to your guns. If you're right, you'll get proven right over time.
There's also another paradigm too, which is that and it's okay, there's very little recognition for or rewards for being right too early. Right? Like being too early in something, and look, I'm happy that what I wrote about was, I think, accurate. I mean, I'm not happy.
Proven by time.
I'm not thrilled with the sort of results of what's happened in our country, but I'm happy that it's been accurate. And my hope is that, recognition or not, I don't care about that. What I hope is that we're moving towards a situation in which at least there's an independent media infrastructure that we can get to the reality and expose the reality in a lot more serious, consistent, and profound way than we've been able to in the past when there weren't these avenues to actually have an independent audience and independent media.
That's what this whole thing's about.
Absolutely.
So David Sirota, thank you for joining us on the Young Turks.
Thanks for having me on the team.